Redditors who had a dying confession, but then lived what happened. When I was 15, I had to have knee surgery because I tore my ACL playing softball. After they doped me up really good, my dumbass brain decided I might die on the table. As they were wheeling me down to surgery, I sat up and apparently shouted at some random orderly to tell my family I wanted to be an organ donor. I have zero recollection of this, but my mom, who was standing in that hall, still laughs about it to this day. I am 37 now. Had a co-worker Larry who was in a job site accident. Basically, he was underneath some scaffolding when it was backed into by a vehicle and collapsed on top of him. He was pinned down, could not feel his legs, and was bleeding from a head wound. Larry was 100% convinced he was going to die. We were trying to pull the scaffold off and render first aid and all that, and he kept asking to use a phone to call his wife Susie. Our supervisor gave him a phone. Larry called Susie and confessed to having multiple affairs, stealing from Susie's parents, creeping on their neighbor's teenage daughter, and doing coke with Susie's sister. Larry was crying, telling her he was so sorry, begging for forgiveness. Turns out Larry was just pinned down by a couple of tubes and braces that fell together just right and was tight enough to pinch a nerve and slow circulation a bit. He got 6 stitches on his head and some bruises, and that was the extent of his physical injuries. However, he did lose his house, his pickup truck, custody of his kids, and half his paycheck to child support and alimony. Plus he got written up for not wearing a hard hat under scaffolding. Edit: I talked to a guy that was working with Larry when it happened. They were taking down the scaffold and a fork truck picked up one of the cart rack things the scaffolding was stored on. The rack was not secured properly, Larry's job, and when the weight shifted, the scaffolding fell off and caused a mess. Also, he said it was not Susie's sister, it was her cousin. Was positive a house was going to come down during the inland hurricane last year. Texted my roommate who was at work at the time, so hey, I might die. Just wanted to say I love you. Too much to risk not saying it. If I do not croak, see you tonight. If I do, sorry for the levity. Well, F-King house was 95% unscathed, and she came home with a huge smile and said she wanted to give it a try. We are not together anymore, but all in all could have gone a lot worse. 7/10 would try again. I had an accident and ended up with a concussion and emergency spinal surgery. Once I got to the hospital, the surgeon quickly went through all the things that could go wrong, so I was aware. He said something like, and with every surgery, there is a very small chance of death, and all my brain heard was, you are 100% gonna bleed out and die. I just had this very clear realization through the confusion of the concussion that I did not tell my brother that I loved him enough. So I called him with like 2% battery and told him to move on and live his life to the fullest. And I will always be proud of him. Yeah. Surgery went absolutely fine, and when I came round, he just joked, even though you survived, I can still live my life to the fullest. Right. It was not an either or situation. I obviously told him he could not. Not really a confession, more of a retraction. My father was recently diagnosed with cancer. After the initial surgery to remove tumors, he was very weak, in a lot of pain, and scared because for the first time in his life he wasn't in control of what was happening to him. Let me preface the rest of this by saying he has always been very selfish and only really does anything that either benefits him somehow or is convenient for him, including being a parent. We were raised by a single mother for most of our childhood, and then got an awesome stepdad from our middle teens to current day. My father has always told my brother and I that we aren't getting any inheritance, that he is going to spend it all before he dies. He has been a bachelor for 30 years, so no spouse either. We've always said more to not give him any power over us, that was fine, it is his money. He should spend it how he chooses. So my dad is in the hospital, thinking he is going to die any day. So he calls my bro and I and says he has realized that he doesn't need to be in a pine box before gifting us anything. He is going give us each a chunk of money and watch us enjoy it before he dies. Now, this money did come with strings. We had to tell him what we were going to use or it for, and he had to approve. So we both talked about doing some home improvement. This met with approval. He never said how much we were going to get, but the ideas he was throwing out there were pretty high dollar. A new pool for my bro, new floors and windows for me, so our eyes were kind of popping. It was very generous, and in my case, potentially game changing, as I really do need both, and am in no position to afford either. Fast forward 2 weeks and all the tests come back. He has a very treatable form of cancer that was caught early, and he has an excellent prognosis. Both my brother and I flew to where he lives to care for him after he got out of the hospital and started chemo. He sat us down and said something to the effect of, "Now that I am not dying, there are still some things I want to do. So I am not giving you any money." Totally his prerogative and his money, and totally in keeping with his personality. But still, oof. My dad and mom got divorced when I was 2 or 3. We were friends all of my life. Never a father-son relationship. When he died, I found out that a lot of his really close, 50+ years, friends were not even aware of me or my older brother. Oh yeah, neither of us were even mentioned in his will. Pretty sure this is how it will go for me. Pre-pandemic, I saw my dad at a pub and went over for a chat. A guy walked up and asked who I was and how I knew my dad, and when I said, "Oh, I'm his daughter," the look of shock told me everything I needed to know. He does not mention me to anyone. Doubt I will get anything from him when he goes, if there even is anything to give. Yeah. At my dad's funeral across the country, my sisters and I kept being asked if we worked with him. But no one knew he had been married for 20+ years and had 3 adult daughters. He was a real piece of work to mom us, so this really wasn't a surprise, but it still sucked. I just felt bad for the people who were blindsided that had known dad for years. They felt terrible, and it made me sad to make their day worse. Oh yeah, there was no will, so we got all his savings bonds in my sister's name. Found that out when sister mailed me a check with photocopies and receipts. She had cashed them out, and my third was just under $30. Living in Belgium. Soon after, there was a series of terrorist attacks, train bombings, the metro, the airport, and the Paris attack. I was taking the train and some weird guy left his backpack on a seat near me and left. I texted my wife, "I know this is crazy, but just in case, I need you to know I love you." He came back eventually. Now I'm terrified to take the train. This might technically count. I was stationed in Hawaii when that ballistic missile threat came through. Before we knew it was fake, I called my wife and my parents. My wife worked on North Shore, which was a bit from where we lived on post, so she was at work too far away to reach before the supposed missile would hit. And my parents lived on the East Coast. Called my wife first. Made sure she understood what was happening. Made sure to give her the rundown on what to do immediately, what to do after it hits, etc, etc, and to give a quick call to family. She called her parents. I called mine. Told my parents to do their best, not to panic. Told them I loved them, no matter what happened. But told them I had to go, because as much as I loved them, Rachel was all alone on the other side of the island and I needed to talk to her. Called my wife again. Tried to keep her as calm as possible. Told her how much I loved her. Told stories of good memories. All while I was sitting there drinking rum from the bottle, knowing either I was about to die or about to go to war with someone. So it was probably going to be a while either way. Turns out some asshole hit the wrong ducking button. Huge sighs of relief. Nervous laughter. Some frustration. But it definitely, I think, helped my wife and my family and I's relationships, saying things out loud that typically people don't say. Guy I know was in the ICU after being in a coma for almost 2 weeks. They had this guy on like 8 different fourth things going into him. Funny enough, he would have lived if the hospital had not given him staph in his blood. His family got paid over that one, but that's a different story. He realizes his situation, and that has not going home. He gets a reverend to come in, and he wants to confess something. He looks over to me and back to the clergy and asks for a minister by name and asks how he is doing. Turns out that particular guy had some accusations made against him during his time in the ministry and had since fled. My friend starts laughing and says behind the power station on the state line, behind it in the swamp, maybe 100 yards into the trees. The clergy asked if he wanted absolution. He said this for you and your boss. Flipped him off and asked him to leave. My ex-mother-in-law had some heart issues due to side effects of prescription drugs. She was convinced she was dying, so she got on the phone to all her friends in this small town and told them she was dying. Once her doctor sorted out her prescriptions, she was fine. She probably stuck around another 10 years. That must have been some awkward conversations in church. On his deathbed, while I was out of the room, my friend told my then wife that I was having an affair with another woman. I was not. She did not mention this until he was in the ground. He was always a jokester, so this was a very committed joke, or it was the brain cancer talking, or it was that crazy ass bitch just jerking my chain. I never will find out. My mom did the opposite of a deep confession. In her last 15-20 years, things went downhill emotionally and mentally for my mom, and she had built a fictional version of her own history that she shared with neighbors, church friends and co-workers. She wanted to control the image they all had of her. Things had been tense between us for years, but when she got sick, I helped her. I spent an entire week living at the hospice facility in her room with her because I did not want her to be alone, and she had literally timed her calls to her sister, who had not spoken to us in decades, and her attorney, hoping to avoid any big revelations until after she died so she could win. I did not find out about all of it before she died, but I caught her egging her sister on to harass me via text message when she could barely speak. I confronted her and cleared things up with her sister. Her co-workers came in and fawned over her and told me what a saint she was and how wonderful and patient she was with the younger nurses. Her boss came in and introduced herself the day after I did busted mom for lying about 10 different things, and she introduced herself and I told her I did heard a lot about her. She got this look on her face and I realized that my mom had professed to hating her so much because she was not fooled. My mother was this kind of person too. She molested me for years, stole, lied, was just an all-around piece of shit, but to the rest of the family she was a saint. She finally admitted to bothering me. She couldn't bring herself to say molest when I was in my 30s. We were never close and did have a falling out after her apology. When I found out she was dying, I did call her to say goodbye. When I got the call she was dead, I kind of shrugged my shoulders and it felt like a weight had been lifted from them. Was going to end my life with my dad's pistol. Sent several friends of mine messages consisting of "this person is toxic for you. You keep getting into bad relationships because of this," like just saying everything I wanted to say. I paced back and forth so much that I forgot to load the damn thing. The click of the hammer and having nothing happen changed me. It was like a second chance. Some people were receptive to my words, but most spread rumors that I was just threatening suicide for attention. The friends who took my words seriously were closer for a while, but I've fallen out with almost everyone over time. I witnessed one. My husband's uncle had gotten into a car crash ahead of us, and while waiting for the ambulance he thought he was going to die because he could not feel anything besides his head and there was a lot of blood in the car. He told us to tell his wife that he loved her and was sorry for not always treating her how she deserved to be treated because she was the love of his life, and although he originally married her because he had a fetish, he had realized over the years that she was so much more and that he did not deserve her and wanted her to never sell herself short when finding love in the future. Ambulance came a bit later, and besides some surface injuries he had ended up badly fracturing 2 of the wings on 3 vertebrae and needed a couple of surgeries to replace the vertebrae. He could not feel anything due to damage and muscle swelling, but could still move a bit. We told his wife more or less what he had said, but it was really awkward hearing someone new looked up to say that they married their wife because she fulfilled a massive fetish. When I was in Iraq, I was part of a small team of people who worked on a base. I spent a lot of time alone when my shift was over. In hindsight, being alone in a war zone makes everything worse. I also had a huge 20+ man tent to myself, since I was kind of a part of one unit and not really part of another. So very frequently we would get rocket and mortar attacks on this base. Ballad 2004, 2005. They would set up roof gutters in the dirt and drop explosives down with a timer, then leave the area Hours later, the mortars would go off, usually in threes. They were surprisingly ineffective, but one unfortunate airman lost his hand and legs to an attack, so not completely useless. One night I was reading, playing video games, whatever, in my tent when I hear the loudest mortar hit I had ever heard. I remember that I felt the sound more than I heard it. Then there was a second one that was even closer, so close that I heard dirt spray onto my tent. This one did not shock me the same as the first, but it was definitely closer. This is the instant where my brain goes into overdrive. I'm alone in a dark tent. I have just heard 2 attacks and they were incredibly close. I know the third one was coming. So what do I do in the instant before the third one hits? I make my peace with God. I remember thinking, if you are there, now is a good time to show up, and also bargaining, if you save me, I will become a priest. Well, in what seemed like an eternity, I waited. The third one never hit. I never became a priest, but that moment was absolutely life-changing. I actually think I have serious PTSD from it, but not in a way that I would expect. I kind of do not care about things as much. Little things bother me, and I'm human. So my wife and kids might say I have a temper or etc. But the big stuff just rolls off me. I feel kind of like this will not go over well on Reddit. I know God exists, and I'm at peace with the metaphysical side of life. Now, this is hard to put into a short post, but I still think about that night from time to time. Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing for more videos.